This is a session that begins with these two individuals talking about what they see happening in their respective houses in the legislature. This session ends with you asking a ton of questions about things you want to know at the state level in Albany here at the State House. So be thinking of that. A lot of our conversations have been federal. We want to bring it back to the state level and what we can anticipate in the coming months. So let's start with the senator in his house, and if he would not mind telling us what we can anticipate out of the state Senate in the next few months.
Thank you so much. And first of all, it's good to be here at CPPAC. Thank you all for coming together here in New York. Our conservative values are alive and well here in New York State, and you are all proof of that. Thank you for being in this fight and for fighting the good fight. Let me start off by saying that I'm very proud that in this past election, we did break the supermajority in the New York State Senate. Now, that's certainly the beginning, and we hope to carry that momentum in. What you're going to see this year, and I think Mary Beth will agree with me, is you're going to see an absolutely toxic level of Trump derangement syndrome in the New York State legislature. There's no doubt about it. It's already happening, folks. But that is our opportunity, because they're actually looking to stand in the way of deporting criminals. People have committed crimes against the people of New York. The Democrats in the New York State legislature are committed to stopping that. And that is our opportunity. You know, I truly believe that everything that we've seen so far, they're going to Trump-proof New York. What that really means is we're going to stop Donald Trump and the federal government from doing things that are good for New Yorkers, like making New York safe again. And that, to me, is going to be the theme that you're going to see throughout this. And you're seeing bills that are being introduced. They want to essentially give people who are not citizens of this state the same rights as citizens, and beyond, by the way. It's already happening. You know, if you're a citizen of New York and you go to collect welfare benefits, there are certain restrictions. But if you're not a citizen, if you're an illegal immigrant, you get basically carte blanche, whatever you want. Food, anything you want to buy, here's a card for you to use, all those things. They're opening up new migrant shelters, one for single men, with over 1,000 single men from that are here illegally are going to be housed in one facility. What could possibly go wrong there? Yeah. So this is what you're going to see. You're going to see again, and I think that Maud said it well. You know, that we're in a blue state, in a blue city, in New York. And they are going to really magnify that in this, and you're seeing it already with the introduction of some of the bills. Let's talk about the budget. You know, the fact that the governor, who is hugely unpopular, is trying to buy her way to re-election next year, and she proposed a $252 billion budget. Now let's put this in perspective. I've been a senator for a little over 5 years. When I came in, I think the budget was $175 billion. She's just proposed $252 billion, and in fact, it's $8.6 billion more than last year. Now, since they've taken over, one-party rule came into effect in 2019 when the Democrats controlled the governor's office, the Senate, and the Assembly, and of course the Attorney General's office. And the budget has gone up 48% in that period of time. Has anybody had a 48% increase in their wages in the last 6 years? Huh? You know what's gone up 48%? The cost of everything. Taxes, food, fuel. That's the New York that we live in. And my Democrat colleagues talk about affordability, but they've done that. Actually, they're doing things the opposite to make things less affordable, less safe, less affordable. My Republican colleagues and I have what we call the Liberate New York agenda. We are going to try to push through as many things as possible to make New York better, safer, and more affordable, because that's the key to making sure that people want to stay here, raise a family here, operate a business here, and I'm proud of myself and my Republican colleagues in moving forth in that effort. So I'll leave it at that.
Excellent. All right, Assemblywoman? All right. Oh, sorry. Yep. You don't even turn it on. It's all set. Yep.
I thought he just meant to hand it off.
It's already on. Yep.
Oh, it's on. Yep. Well, that was right next to me the whole time. I hope nobody heard anything. It's so nice to be here again this year. Thank you. This has become kind of our yearly thing. Yeah, it's really nice. And I could be just really cute and just say, what he said, but I'll try to add to it a little bit. I agree with every single thing that he said saying. It is a ridiculously huge first budget proposal coming out of the governor's office. And of course, the next thing that will happen is we'll have the one House budgets, one from the Senate majority, one from the Assembly majority. And guess what? It's going to be higher than what the governor proposed, even higher. So we're not nearly done yet. And then the question is going to be, what's the final budget going to look like at or around April 1st? I agree that since we went to one-party rule in the state, once the Senate flipped, the guardrails are just off, and it's like they just can't help themselves. We did have a pandemic thrown in there. We understand that there needed to be some increased pandemic spending, but it's like you can't unring a bell. Once that number gets up there, it's not coming down with the with one-party rule right now. So that's what we're seeing. I was kind of chuckling in the rest of November and December, getting ready to come back into session, because the whole Democratic Party was just in an uproar. They just could not believe that they had lost at the federal level. And I do see, it's almost like some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are just still kind of stumbling around, and they just can't believe it. And listening to podcasts where they were assuring themselves, like, well, we're not going to have a big hissy fit over every single thing that Donald Trump comes out with, but they can't help themselves. They're just they're in a twist over every single thing. And we're going to hear that on the floor as we debate bills and as we see legislation coming forward. So we all need to just buckle up, because it's always an interesting session. Every year it's a little bit different, and we'll have to see what the final twist is going to be on this one.
Yeah, just to set some context for what we see going on this year, during the March for Life, if you're familiar with the March for Life in Washington, D.C., many New Yorkers I know were out there participating in that process. While that was happening, we were watching some different things happening here in the state legislature. In fact, 5 bills that would expand abortion access were moving under the Democratic majority in the state Senate that same week. 5 bills advanced. And so if there's going to be a tone or a tenor, you're right, the Democrats can't help themselves. What's happening is every time the pendulum swings to the federal level, there's this kickback at the state level. And again, it's like this Pavlovian response. They can't help themselves from going after whatever crazy thing is out there. On the first day of session, you heard Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins talk about affordability. I heard the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie, do the same thing. Talk about affordability was going to be the word of the session. The first week of active legislation moving, the word was abortion. And so it just shows you the contrast that you're going to see and what's going to happen, and why it's so important that we as conservatives are continuing to get the message out there about these things, so the average person, the public, can understand that there's a disconnect between those in Albany and those majorities and what the average New Yorker is concerned about with their pocketbook. So that's kind of where I think it helps set some of the context for where we're going. First question. All right. If Trump does end the Department of Education and all funding and control is returned to the state, what moves do you think need to be made at the state level to best position parents and students? We love the thought of education returning to the states, unless you live in New York. So yeah, who'd like to start with that one?
Okay. Well, I think we have to remember that I think it was Jimmy Carter that created the Department of Education. And when he created it, America was #1 across the world in pretty much everything. Math, science, all of that. Since then, we have plummeted. So what has the Department of Education actually delivered for the kids, of the United States? So, and I do believe this is something that the states should address. The role of the federal government, by our founders' definition, was supposed to be limited. And now the government is in everything. And education, if you could show me that those results were better and not worse, then maybe you'd have an argument for why we should have a centralized Department of Education. But the reality is this is not a role of the federal government. And as far as here in New York, look, if people have said, as Maud said, failing schools, we need school choice here in New York State. Absolutely, 100%. I'm a business person. Nothing makes things better than competition. And having schools that are be able to, whether it be whatever kind of private school, Catholic school, to be able to get the funding that basically travels with the student and allow them to provide that education might give pause to some of these folks in the public schools to think that they can continue to just, instead of educating our children, indoctrinating them and watching them fail. I mean, once again, in New York State, we've watched our scores plummet. You know, people complain, well, New York invests more in education. That's right. We spend more money per pupil than any other state in the nation, twice the national average. And our results aren't even in the middle anymore. We're in the lower half. That's because most of that money isn't spent on educating our kids. It's spent on building new buildings and paying off special interests. And education needs to have some competition, and school choice is, I think, a way to make our education system better here in New York State.
Yeah. Agree. I think one thing that I think is going to be very interesting this year, specific to education, is going to be the governor's proposal for the cell phone ban in schools, bell to bell. And I thought, as I participated in the education budget hearing last week, it was interesting that although the teachers union is in support of it, there's also a real concern about local control. And having spoken to superintendents in my district who have done the hard work, in some cases it took them well over a year of bringing all of their individual stakeholders together, the PTA, listen to the students as well, talk to the teachers, and try to come up with a plan for that individual school district. To have that just kind of superseded by government action at the state level is causing me some concern. I do think that we need to do something because, I mean, I have 6 kids, and my younger children were completely lost to the world once they got a smartphone. They just were. And I think that there is so much learning loss that was experienced for years, but particularly during the pandemic. Our kids really took a big step back. That I think we do need to remove distractions. But again, as conservative legislators, I think that we also value local control. And I think that ties in with what you're saying about getting the federal government out of it and bringing it down to a more local level so that parents have an ability to speak up. In one of my school districts, for example, they have just a very simple plan that they've enacted that's working really well for them, where they have, imagine maybe you could have a visual, but the pockets that, sometimes you can put your shoes on that you hang on the back of a door. Something as simple as that labeled for each kid when they come into the learning environment, not the cafeteria, not the hallways. When they go into a classroom to learn, they have to put their cell phone in there for that classroom time. And that has been working well, but that's not a bell-to-bell thing like the governor's talking about. So it's going to be really interesting to see whether that language makes it into the final budget, whether it's a standalone bill, how that gets addressed. I think it definitely is a priority that the governor has expressed, and I do think we can do something about it. But how we do it and how we do it in a way that respects our local school districts and who have already done a lot of this hard work in their area, that remains to be seen.
You know, the news broke this last week that the Education Commissioner, Betty Rosa, received a $155,000 increase in salary, another $25,000 to come. Apparently, she was having difficulty affording her home in Rockland County and on Long Island, the poor woman, I'm so sorry. And so she needed this big raise to bring her salary to $489,000 as the Commissioner of Education here in New York. While we continue to, as you stated, Senator, pay more than we do for just about anybody else in the country per student. And yet our return on investment, I would say, is probably not quite up there. I recognize that in New York we have regents, but what can the legislature do to have greater control over education in our state?
Do you really want this legislature to have a greater control over education?
Well, accountability maybe is a better word.
So here's the thing. I hear all the time, it's funny now, I'm listening to Democrats now in my district talk about, how unaffordable school taxes are and why aren't we consolidating schools, yet every time a school consolidation comes up to a vote, it fails. Right. And, I think you have in other states, the counties control the school district, county government, elected officials. You have right now, all these small boards of education. So maybe there's a better model out there that we could follow. And I'm not disparaging people that serve on school boards. Quite frankly, it's the most thankless elected job in New York State to serve on a school board, because when everything's going well, nobody cares. As soon as something goes wrong, they're yelling and screaming and pounding on the table at your meeting. So I give credit to folks that step up, but I think that there is this misconception that we have more to do other than funding at the state level. So anything beyond what we have is essentially, like I said, creating an infrastructure to indoctrinate our children, to push this woke ideology. That's really what the state does. We're no longer really setting standards. In fact, we're lowering standards. We're going to get rid of regions. We're going to get rid of everything. Instead of trying to uplift the kids that are struggling to a certain level, we want to bring everybody else down. We want to dilute it, so that and it's the dumbing down essentially of our education system. So I don't know that I want our New York State legislature to have more control, but I think decentralized county governments could do a much better job in kind of reining in some of the irresponsibility that we've seen.
I think it's kind of sad to hear a state legislator say this, but I'm just going to say that I find that the more the state gets involved with things, the more messed up it gets. And so I think we have to be really careful about that. Very recently, within the last couple weeks, we've been doing press conferences and calling attention to something that has to do with early intervention services that are provided to kids before they get into K through 12. And those early intervention services are critical to helping kids that have developmental issues, and if they're provided, the services are provided well and on time and with enough intensity, a lot of times by the time those kids get to K through 12, they don't even need any more services if it's delivered properly. But the problem is that the Department of Health rolled out a brand new, they outsourced this new billing system for the providers to a one bid contract, no transparency, millions and millions of dollars for this contract for this new EI, Early Intervention Hub. And almost as soon as it rolled out in October, our phone was ringing off the hook in our district office, and I know our colleagues were getting those calls too, saying, I can't get paid. I'm a provider. I'm a single parent too. I can't get paid. I need that money to be able to raise my family. I'm not going to be able to provide these services. And you call the Department of Health. I call the Department of Health. I'm supposed to get a timely response from our governmental affairs person, and the answer we get is, well, we're working on it. No, unacceptable. So I just say, let's be careful when we say we want to give more to the state of New York to handle, because what I've seen is that more times than not, it just gets more and more screwed up.
Okay. All right, so looking at New York City as an example of outrageous policies or efforts such as non-citizen voting, could either or both houses of the legislature shape policy by requiring and denying home rule messages? Maybe related to the last question.
Well, I mean, I guess procedurally, local bills require home rule, yes. I spent 10 years in county government, and I can tell you that I'm a big supporter of local control on things. So, but I'm not sure if the question is just, could we deny that home rule request? I think from a, technical standpoint, yes, you could. But, I think New York State already does way too much to be this draconian overlord. Again, I'm a former county executive. We have Bruce Blakeman here from Nassau County, amazing county executive there. Yes. He will tell you, like I will, that, our budget is really controlled by New York State. And when I was county executive, 85% of our county budget in Little Chautauqua County went to cover unfunded state mandates. Erie County, the neighbor next door, 100%. Every dollar collected, 100% of every dollar collected in property taxes in Erie County goes just to cover the local share of Medicaid, which is a program entirely administered or mandated out of Albany. So, when you look at it that way, I'm always sympathetic because I lived it. I think people in local governments should absolutely get the ability to send a home rule message, and we should, I think, act on that and I think honor those things.
Okay. All right. Next question. And this is Senator Borrello. In your opinion, what do you suggest New Yorkers do, what steps to take so that we can stop unconstitutional laws? What else can we do?
Well, I would not say don't rent a U-Haul and move. That's probably the first thing I would say not to do. So, there was this push to do constitutional counties.
Yeah.
And it sounds nice, but, I don't think that has a real practical impact. The reality is I think we have a new ally now in Washington. And we have the President of the United States, we have a Republican Congress that will help uphold the United States Constitution. The New York State Constitution, unfortunately, has some new additions. I've already seen some of my colleagues saying we're going to protect essentially the constitutional rights of non-citizens, because now in New York State they have constitutional rights. So the United States Constitution should be upheld. I'm hopeful that our federal partners will help us in that effort. And then here in New York, it comes down, unfortunately, to litigation, which is very expensive and takes a long time. As someone who's been involved in litigation, I can tell you that. And unfortunately, because our justice system in New York, whether it's once you get past the state Supreme Court, once you get to the appellate division, the Court of Appeals, has been compromised by politics. We have a chief judge that is absolutely a lapdog for progressive policies, and they have not honored the Constitution. They refused essentially to do anything that flies in the face of this far left radical policy. So I'm hopeful that we have new allies in D.C. that will help us.
Yeah, I remember the night they passed the so-called Concealed Carry Improvement Act, SAFE Act Round 2, and I was sitting out there that night with a sponsor and some of their members in the Senate lobby, and I said to the sponsor, you realize this is blatantly unconstitutional. And in my case, I was recognizing how it's going to impact houses of worship. To which point he looked at me and he said, well, one, I can't figure out why anybody would want a firearm in a house of worship to begin with, and I'm thinking protection right off the bat. But number two, he said, well, we're going to let the courts just figure it out anyways. And that increasingly seems to be the mindset of some of your colleagues in Albany is they will go ahead and pass things they know or believe are unconstitutional and let the courts figure it out. The problem is it takes years of a process to get through, as the senator has spoken to, and to get a case to the Supreme Court, I mean, it's like a minimum $1 million, right, to get a case to the United States Supreme Court to be heard. And so it makes it really, really cost prohibitive and time consuming when the oath is taken to uphold the Constitution, and legislators can't seem to do that in too many cases.
I wanted to just add to that for a second.
Yeah.
So one thing that happened either in last session or the one before that, they start to blend after a while, but one of the things was it said that if you have a constitutional challenge, you now can only bring it to certain courts instead of to any court that could previously have heard it. So that to me was we debated that like crazy on the floor before that was voted upon, because that's just so offensive, the idea that there were only certain, and it was where they felt that they had the most friendly judges, is where they wanted to send these to. I mean, it was pretty obvious what was happening, but how completely disrespectful to the system itself to do that,
No, they were accusing you of judge shopping by going to these other jurisdictions, right?
So they're going to do the shopping for you.
So they did it for you. They
That's
picked out the
what
ones where they could win and said you can only come here. Exactly.
Right.
All right, this goes along, looking back to you, Assemblywoman. Do you think the upstate Democrat majorities the upstate Democrats just go along with New York City Democrats, or do they ever try to moderate them? And I want you to talk to the dynamics, I'm going to press a little further, is to the majority is so large that they can allow certain members to peel off.
Right.
Talk about that.
Right. So in the Assembly chamber, we have 150 Assembly members. 47 are Republican, so 103 for the Democrats, and 76 votes needed to pass a piece of legislation. So they do have a lot of extras, and so what we find are that more marginal Democratic members are allowed to vote with the Republican conference on a bill that they think may give them a problem in their next election. So we do see that. I won't name them by name, but there are a good half dozen or so, I would say. The upstate Democrats are a mixed bag. Some are pretty left-leaning, but some are more what you would consider to be more moderate. They themselves meet separately than their Democratic conference, is my understanding. And they try to come up with strategies for then going into the whole Democratic conference to try to get bills pulled that are being pushed and to try to moderate the effect. But it's an uphill climb for them because if anything, the swing is more left-leaning. I started, this is my 9th year. Since the time that I started, I'm definitely seeing a shift in the Democratic conference more to the left. There are more DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, members than previously. There used to be just a couple, now there are more. And as the older Democratic members are retiring, they seem to be getting either primaried or just generally replaced by more left-leaning members. So it's an uphill climb, I think, for the more moderate Democrats. I often say that I would love to be a fly on the wall for Democratic conference, only because then I would have wings and I could fly out when I wanted to. I feel, these conferences go on for a while. They can be very impassioned. They were having problems with leaks coming out of conference, which I think that they have largely addressed. But they only have a minute or two to pitch their being for or against, and then it just moves on. And interestingly, Jeff Aubrey used to be the speaker pro tem. Up on the dais, you'd hear Mr. Aubrey. He finally retired. God bless him for that. And he was great to work with. Pam Hunter has taken his spot now. And Pam, from what I understand, who's from the Syracuse area, she used to be the person within Democratic Conference who kept that train running, who said, all right, your minute's up, your time is up, go to the next person. So I feel like that was probably, she's pretty battle tested for her job now up on the dais, because to just try to manage that show, shall we say, within the Democratic Conference is really tough, I'm sure.
Okay. Question regarding where do we stand on repaying the federal loans given to the state during COVID, the unemployment side of that, from the small business perspective?
Well, where we stand is we are getting crushed as business owners by this. We all got billed. I'll tell you something. The most difficult constituent I have is my wife, because she hands me these bills and that are increasing. Okay, and every single business in New York State is paying the maximum rate right now for unemployment insurance, and we're getting dinged for essentially interest penalties from the federal government. Most states took their federal COVID money and used it to fill that unemployment crater in the unemployment insurance fund. New York hasn't given a dime to that, not a dime. And we heard that maybe in this budget there was going to be something dedicated to it. But the reality is that there has been nothing given. Now, people understand that the unemployment insurance fund is funded by businesses and people that, that work for businesses that pay those taxes. And we had the most draconian, ridiculous lockdowns and by the way, we experienced more fraud than any other state. So much so, the Department of Labor still won't tell us how much we experienced. But to his credit, Tom DiNapoli estimated it at $11 billion, which is almost exactly the crater that was in our unemployment insurance fund. So essentially, every business in New York State is paying these huge penalties to cover unchecked fraud in the New York State Unemployment Insurance Fund. And by the way, I can tell you that they denied no one, even when people had jobs. My wife was, during the pandemic, was absolutely wringing her hands as she watched these unemployment claims pile up on her desk while she couldn't fill positions. We actually had people, we own restaurants. We had people that said that they fear catching COVID is the reason they can't come to work, that show up to eat and drink at our restaurant. And so that's why we have this Department of Labor that is so anti-business and created this massive multi-billion-dollar impact that every business is paying. So look at all the things that are going on right now. It's just one more nail in the coffin of someone who runs a business. That's why people are shutting their businesses down, moving out of state, because it's such a hostile place to do business. And I'm ashamed, absolutely ashamed, that there wasn't a single dime dedicated to that.
100%. And I think the other thing that I think is a major disconnect is how can you how can you talk about affordability and not recognize the fact that the vast majority of businesses in New York State are small, very often family businesses like George's? How can you reconcile that? They're not just all big faceless corporations that we need to tax and tax and tax and tax. It's affordability goes to the people that are running those businesses too, because they have to run their business. They have to go to grocery stores. They have to do. I mean, they're people that run these businesses. They're people behind these businesses. So the idea that when you're going to talk about affordability, but you're going to just keep slicing that up so that you're only going to be talking about affordability for a very small number is just, it's ridiculous.
All right, how much, and if we can calculate this, how much are the city and the state spending taxpayer dollars on sanctuary cities, illegal aliens? The numbers should be used by all conservatives running for office to make the voting public outraged and vote out the offending politicians.
Well, just in the New York State budget in the last 2 cycles, prior to this year, it was $4.2 billion. And then I think New York City's up to $5 billion. So $10 billion plus. Now, that's just actually checks written for that. That doesn't include the economic impact of these sanctuary cities. So that's a multiple billions. But to put it in perspective, again, from a former local government official, we couldn't get an increase in our CHIPS funding, the highway and bridge funds last year. We were told we couldn't afford it. We asked for $250 million more, because again, inflation, cost of goods, everything goes up. So they couldn't. Literally, Liz Kruger, chair of finance, says, I'm sorry, we couldn't afford, we had to keep it flat, we couldn't afford that $250 million. But we gave New York City another $2 billion for illegal immigrants. So forget your roads and bridges, so that's the real impact, folks. Next time you go over a pothole on a state road, just remember, we couldn't fill that pothole because we had to send money to New York City for illegal immigrants. That's the real impact of this.
Yeah. All right. So this week we're starting to hear about an effort to delay certain special election races. Can you talk to us a little more about that, and what can we do to try to stop that from happening?
Right. So, and this definitely impacts my area around Saratoga County, because I think one of the big reasons behind this last-minute sort of legislative push that I haven't seen the bill language on, but it's being widely reported is going to come up maybe sometime this week, maybe as soon as tomorrow, basically says that it's being developed, I believe, specifically because of Elise Stefanik being elevated to UN ambassador. So what happens is that Elise has gone through her confirmation hearing. A vote will be coming at some point. Sooner would be nice for Elise and for us, because we would like her to be able to get to the UN and start working on the national stage to represent our country's interests. But when she is confirmed and there you have a vacancy, then the governor has under current law, has 10 days to set a special election, which must then also be held within a certain number of days. This legislation will push it all out. The reason is they want to create more of a vacancy and a tighter vote at the House on President Trump's agenda as it comes through the House, including, big votes that are going to be coming up, budgetary votes that'll be coming up as soon as May. So not only is that a way to try to Trump-proof, right, New York, try to make things more difficult for President Trump, but it also, in the process, disenfranchises a huge number of voters in this enormous congressional district. So, all of that work that you look to your Congress member to help you with on a constituent basis, forget about it. There's not going to be a staff there. The staff isn't going to be there doing the work. So it's an unholy mess right now, and it would be laughable if it were not so sad that the party on the other side of the aisle that keeps talking about how we're making all of these election law changes so that where we can enfranchise and make it easier for people to vote is going to do something, take an action, perhaps as early as tomorrow, that will disenfranchise a great number of people.
And not just a congressional seat, there's a state Senate race that this could affect as well.
Yeah, well, and again, the Democrats, they don't like the rules, they change them for their favor. They have to manipulate things because they know that they're losing the confidence, of New Yorkers and of the American people. So they have to, manipulate things in their favor, and that's what's going on here. There's no doubt about it. As the Assemblywoman said, this is, we're going to consolidate to save money. So you're going to save money on one special election, which, first of all, when do they ever give a crap about saving money?
Exactly.
It's pretty obvious. So this is about manipulating our election process.
All right.